been, huh? And yesterday as well. How we doing? Are we having a good time? Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining me. One more talk before lunch. Let's get right into it. I am so excited to share this with you today. So I'm going to start with a little story. Once upon a time, I was on the Vienna Freelancers Slack group, and I saw this message from my buddy Aaron. Hey, I've got a client looking for React Native dev, remote, freelance, good rate, could end up being a retainer, like a long-term solution. I thought, bingo, that's for me. Now, tech stack, this was a React Native app, React, but lets you write code that runs on iOS, Android, web, and some other platforms. And it was also TypeScript. And it was my first time writing TypeScript, actually. And one of the things I love about being a freelancer is, for some reason, it's given me the flexibility, versatility, and bravery to be like, yeah, sure, I'll try TypeScript, no problem. And, it was all well and good. Let's see, at the time, the last release and commit had been done in around 2019. So I was like, cool, no problem. I'll just fire it up, get it on the terminal, clone the repository, all that good stuff, run the app, and I get an error. Could not find iPhone 6 simulator. Now, I'm sorry to impart some psychic damage, but the iPhone 6 did not, in fact, come out last year, as I feel it did. But it's actually been more time between the iPhone 6 and now than the original iPhone and the iPhone 6. But we're not going to talk about that today. I'm just sharing some of my pain. Tried running on Android as well, no go. Something about Java. Okay. I thought, hey, you know what? No problem. I'll just upgrade it. Just upgrade some of those packages. Do a little hop into package.json and bump the number. It's all well and good. Here's the thing. At the time, the React Native version on this project was 55.4, whereas the current one was 74.1. That's almost 20 versions behind. But I thought, hey, no problem. I'll just bump up React Native. And then something broke. And then I thought, well, something broke with React. I'll just upgrade React, which is a codependency of React Native. Then something else broke. So no problem, I'll just upgrade React DOM, and so on and so forth until I felt like, do you all have these at home? Hold up. Do you all have these at home? Cable boxes? Can I get a hands up? Do you have a cable box at home? I love you all so much. Don't let the haters deter you. You will someday need that Nokia 3310 charger that you still have. I promise. But for the purposes of this presentation, it felt very analogous. Look at that fancy word. It felt very similar to knitting and yarn, how things get tangled. Oh, I'm not going to stand too far away from this. Fantastic. To knitting and yarn. Don't let my incredible artist skills deter you. That is a tangled ball of yarn next to the drawing that was not made by me. So in this presentation, I would love to be able to stand here and say, oh, what are the best practices for managing dependencies? No, I'm going to go with what are my favorite. And in order to tell you what my favorite practices are, why not tell you a little bit about me? Hi, my name is Carmen. My pronouns are she, her. I'm originally from Chile, but I've been living in redacted amount of time in Vienna in Austria. One of my favorite projects that I'm co-working on with my buddy Jess is the Bad Website Club, which is an initiative to help folks feel more comfortable in shipping code and making websites, even though they feel, you know what, it's not ready, it's not perfect, look at all those cool websites out there. Just put it out there, have fun, learn with us. It's a great time. I love community so much, and I'm so grateful to those who made it possible for me to be here today. Joanna actually onboarded me to the Mozilla Tech Speakers program a long time ago, and if it wasn't for you and that community and all of those folks there, I wouldn't have what I have today. Breathe. I wouldn't have what I have today, and I'm so grateful, and I hope you all also feel motivated to be able to impart your knowledge and do the same thing. So back to code. The thing about dependencies is oftentimes we think of it as well, it's code that somebody else wrote. I'm not concerned about it. But the truth is, when you're running someone else's code, you're running someone else's code. It is every bit as critical to the software as the code that we write. And you all know this meme, right? Like the heaviest objects in the universe. And your node modules folder is pretty big. I saw a presentation a few years ago where somebody made a game of Katamari. Do you all know Katamari? Like you roll a ball and you pick up objects and it gets bigger and bigger. Somebody made that where you could feed it your node modules folder. And it got increasingly difficult. I cannot remember the name of it. It just occurred to me now. It's super fun. And the thing is, when you hop into someone's project, into especially a piece of code that you haven't perhaps been onboarded to all the way, a lot of the time, those dependencies, that code, it's been carefully put together. And I don't know about the rest of y'all, but sometimes it feels to me like messing with that feels like an extremely large-scale, scary game of Jenga, where you try to move stuff and make sure it doesn't fall over. Now I'm going to do that part where I use like a fancy quote. So the thing is, it kind of feels like it never ends, does it? Art is never finished, only abandoned. I worked so hard to really make sure that this wasn't one of those like Mark Twain quotes where they just attribute it to Leonardo da Vinci. I hope it is. So I'm going to share with you some lessons that I've learned along the years in terms of working with complex dependencies. So what are dependencies and how do they interact with one another? Now, if you've worked in JavaScript projects, you've probably worked a lot with dependencies and dev dependencies. And the thing is, like I've worked in a lot of stacks over the years, and one of the things that I regret losing sometimes is my sense of curiosity and being like, okay, but why is it a dev dependency? What's the difference? And I will admit that in some of my weaker moments, I've just kind of gone by vibes and just been like, oh, I guess this feels like a dev dependency. And the thing is, they do have a, concrete purpose. Dev dependencies do dev stuff, but don't get included in a production bundle. So for example, in the case of React Native, it doesn't go into the mobile app that's on someone's app store or phone, supposedly. It will happen that some bundlers will, by accident, there have been bugs out there where they do sometimes, not on purpose, get included. But that's what they're meant for. And the thing is, these dependencies that we declare, just like our code, need to be looked after from time to time. Y'all know how it feels really good to delete code, right? Can we talk about how good it feels to delete dependencies? Right? And especially as platforms, the web, the mobile phones, and all of that, the engines themselves get updated, sometimes those dependencies are no longer needed. So it's a good idea to go through them from time to time and delete them. Now, these are called direct dependency. And the problem is, those are all well and good. We have control over them. But what about the dependencies that those dependencies depend on? What a nice and clear way to say that. The thing is, if you leave that box open, they are going to just start piling into that box. And these are called transitive dependencies. And this is where a lot of that source of chunkiness comes to that node modules folder. Now, you've probably heard of both of these, and there's even more types of dependencies, and probably some that I'll miss in this presentation. But another one that I want to shout out is peer dependencies. You all heard of peer dependencies? Cool. Do you all understand what they are? Because I have to admit I didn't. Kinda, right? Yeah. So peer dependencies in particular are dependencies that, say if we're writing a package, are dependencies that our package is compatible with, right? So say I'm writing a fancy charts package. Sorry, just gonna fix this because it slipped off. There we go. Sorry about that. Say we're writing a little fancy charts package. Now, our fancy charts package is compatible with chart.js, but it doesn't depend, that is, in the code we write, on chart.js. But when we install it, when somebody goes to install it, they do need to use it. This is where declaring it as a peer dependency comes in handy, because now, if somebody goes and installs my fancy charts package, it will also install chart.js. And then there's a lock file. Has any of you all ever been through the lock file or had a merge conflict with the lock file? I don't know about the rest of y'all, but when I get a merge conflict, I'm just like, yeah, I'll just delete it and start over. Not the best practice. I'm not going to recommend. That's why it's not a slide. What it does is, as the name might suggest, lock down at install time the specific versions and sources of those packages. Look at that. How many is that? 18,000 lines. It's a big file. It gets normally included in your repository so that when you're working in a team, you are working in the same or almost the same environment as your coworkers are. I am so sorry. Just going to fix this one more time. There we go. So that's dependencies. And I don't know about the rest of you all, especially as a freelancer, I sometimes feel overwhelmed when working with complex code. And I sometimes just have to take a step back and remember how wonderful it is that folks work so hard to make our lives as developers easier. By making tools like, oh, I'm going to step forward again. There we go. By making tools like Yarn Upgrade Interactive. Has any of y'all ever used Yarn Upgrade Interactive? Isn't it the best? Look at this. So it shows you a list of all packages and the possible upgrades you can make on them. And you can just go boop, 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 choose the ones you want. Same goes for NPM check updates. Fantastic stuff. But beyond that, what if your environment is so complex? The thing about React Native is that you don't only depend on Node. You don't only depend on React as the changes come to them, but it's also you're at the whims of Apple and Google and the changes they're making. And like, y'all, the folks at the React Native community have made an upgrade helper. That just goes to tell you how difficult this is. And you can just specify, I'm going from 55 to 74. And it just gives you not just a detailed series of readmes of like how to upgrade, but also diffs in those config files, like differences in those config files. Like, this is magic stuff, y'all. And somebody went and did it for us. And like, I think it's important to remember that you can also contribute to this or make your own resources. It might seem like, well, I just upgraded. What's the big deal? But like, somebody's going to be stuck as well. Trust me. I'm going to use my left hand for this, just to be a little bit closer. So then we have to think about the problems start, right? You upgrade one thing, it breaks, you upfix another thing, that breaks, and then you're kind of like overwhelmed. You've probably all seen the could not resolve. I'm sorry to impart the pain just before lunch. One of my favorite lessons that I've learned over the years in software development is breaking a problem down into smaller problems and getting little small wins out of those, and then you keep going and getting motivated. So I broke it down into two problems. I need to get the iOS build running, and then I need to get the Android build running. And to systematically go through it, cool, I've adapted to auto-linking. Now packages get linked automatically, something, you don't have to open Xcode. Fix compiler errors, broken UI elements, bugs introduced by upgrading, fix the compiler warnings, all well and done. I'm done. It runs on iOS. I'm happy. Move on to Android. Forget about iOS. Now I'm focused on Android. And I do that same thing over time. All tick, 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 all done. And then I'm like, cool, ready to release. Just going to do a quick check on iOS. And through fixing Android, I broke iOS again. And okay, I'm about to age myself a little bit here. It kind of feels like a game of Greenhouse on Game of Watch. Does anybody know this? One person, okay, cool. So this is an ancient Nintendo game from back in like the LCD era. It got re-released on Game Boy, that's why I know it. I'm not that old. And what I love about this game is that you're playing as a gardener who's protecting their plants from these bugs, and you have to focus on one bug at a time. See, analogous. And you're going from bug to bug, and you're just like focusing on one bug, firing your bug repellent thing, and you're just like, it's on two screens. It's actually really cool technology, but we're not here to focus on that. The trick of this is that you are focused on one task at a time, you get these small wins, and you get that ball rolling. I've never really thought of myself as somebody who's going to stand on stage and be like, you need to use this tool. But here's the thing. I started out as an Objective-C macOS developer. Nothing scares me. And I've learned to adapt to the fact that our tools are going to change. And it's not about what is the best tool, but what is the best tool for you for the job. So I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, stand here, sorry, and be like, oh, you should use Yarn, or oh, you should use NPM, or oh, you should use PNPM. I did look it up, by the way. The P in PNPM stands for performant NPM. I didn't know that. Conferences. I like Yarn for specific situations where I need to do parallel installs that, especially with like large native stuff like React Native, I find it helpful. Your mileage may vary. I invite you all to try and convince me gently why the other one is better. But these package managers have so much built into them that make our lives easier, and in specific cases, have extra tooling that can help us. For example, have y'all used npm-y before? It's so cool. You could just be like, hey, why is this package in my node modules? And it'll just tell you, oh, I don't know if it's pronounced dequal or dequal, but I'm going to go with dequal because it sounds kind of cool. And it just tells you, it's like, oh, actually, it comes from here, that comes from here, that comes from here, that comes from here. And if there's multiple versions of it, same thing. And I think that's super cool. It even tells you when it's been like deduplicated. So in case like multiple packages require multiple versions of multiple packages, it's just like condensing them. Y'all, the work that goes into this is wild. But what about when our dependency management becomes a little bit more complex? I'm not going to stand here. I've been saying that a lot during this presentation. I'm going to try and switch it up a little bit. Look, monorepos have their uses. Maybe some folks don't like them. But in the case that you are using one, have you all heard of Yarn workspaces? It lets you define specific and like separate the specific parts of your code base that have shared dependencies. Say if you have like a package and a website in the same repository, you can just define different workspaces for it and share dependencies for them. Or if you have a monorepo with multiple packages in it, bam, just define those shared dependencies. Now here's a fun fact. Yarn, the project itself, I love it. Do you all know the term dog fooding? Right? It's like when you use your own tool to build your tool. Haha, Yarn workspaces is used to build Yarn. That's kind of cool. I like NX myself. Any NX fans in the room? Cool. Couple. If you're making monorepos, I find NX super helpful for that same thing. You just like separate your code bases into smaller code bases, and then you define shared dependencies. And you've got a whole bunch of other stuff you can do, like CI and like running multiple apps, some fancy Docker stuff that I totally understand. So, then there's shrink wrapping. Have y'all heard of shrink wrap before? Think of it when you publish a package. The purpose is not to publish your package log. But if you need to, say if you've got a CLI tool that you're putting up on a registry, with shrink wrap, you can say, I want exactly these versions. It's like a public lock file. Over time, dependencies get vulnerabilities, and responsible, kind, focused package maintainers will declare that. You can use npm audit. I don't know about y'all, but I sometimes just use it being like, oh, I hope that fixes it. Lets you see and get an overview of which packages have vulnerabilities, and ideally you should update. But you don't have to do that yourself. There are automated tools for that. Don't we love automated tools? For example, Dependabot and Sneak lets you do it like even more with security focus, or Renovate. Renovate makes so many PRs on my open source projects. Allow you to have this automated dependency management, which is super helpful. Once again, isn't it wonderful how we collaborate openly as a community? Couple more lessons learned. When making a dependency upgrade, it's sometimes important to think like, do I just go from like 55, so React Native, in the case of React Native, for example, do I go from 55 to 59 because it's a big leap for like how it compiles something Java, Android? I'm not sure I get it, to be honest. Or do I go from 55 to 60 because, oh, React Native 60 updates to use auto-linking as opposed to having to like open Xcode or mess around with like Maven or something. But I decided, hey, I'm just going to go from like 55 all the way to 74, even if it kills me. So you might be wondering, but why would you do that? Well, why not? I'll tell you why not. Or I'll tell you why, really. Because it offers a certain amount of stability. You know if you're going to the latest version, you're going to be OK at least for a little while longer. And look, we're going to have to do it eventually, go to the latest one. Because again, I mean, iOS and Android update every freaking year. Which is exciting as a user. As a developer, not so much. But then, how often should we do this? And I'm going to do this thing where I take like the words from somebody very smart, from Martin Fowler, who says, if it hurts, do it often. when you're upgrading these packages and you have a workflow for releases and like a workflow for like doing this regularly, it helps to mitigate some of the pain that you would feel if you haven't updated the app since 2019. Sorry. One more. There we go. Cool. Couple more lessons and then we go get to have lunch. Have y'all heard of something called bleeding edge branches in Git? Are there any fans in here of bleeding edge branches, or am I the only one? Oop, that might be the... Hey, we got one! Fantastic. I love bleeding edge branches. Oh, sorry, this thing keeps coming out. Okay. I love bleeding edge branches because they allow me to have just a sort of like sandbox, scratch pad branch where I can experiment with things like dependency upgrades, which I can then have little likely broken tiny commits in, have a clear defined history of like how I'm going around fixing problems. And look, maybe I'm a weirdo, I like rebasing. Hey, fantastic. It's easy to rebase this way because then you go clean up what you need, merge, squash, all that good stuff. And I find this a really helpful workflow, and I recommend it if you all want to use it. And the final thing that I learned when working with complex dependency management and upgrades thereof is knowing where to draw the line. How much upgrading is too much upgrading? Because the thing is, for example, with that app I was working on, there were 72 packages in that package.json file, which doesn't sound like a lot until you start upgrading them. So I decided not to upgrade them all. I even decided not to upgrade them in the major patchway. If you're not familiar with semantic versioning, or semver, which always sounds like a Pokemon, there's 3 components to a version of a package. You've got the patch version, so going from 7 to 8 is likely going to be bug fixes, make stuff more stable, good stuff, love a patch. Going from minor, 6 to 7, is going to be adding features, not breaking anything that you know and love, just like bringing you more stuff to love. And then there's the major upgrade, which will likely break stuff and you need to be more careful about. And you might think like, well, then I'll never do a major upgrade. And like, here's the thing, like you will eventually have to do it. And just because you haven't done it now, because you do have a deadline, you do have to like release a new version of the app, does that mean that you never have to do it? Okay, folks, we're coming to the end. I just wanted to go once more over what we've learned today. So we've talked about what kinds of dependencies there are. We've gone over how community is so important to all of this. We've gone over breaking down problems into small wins. We've gone over picking the right tools for the job. We've gone over making large dependency upgrades, working with bleeding edge branches, and knowing where to draw lines. And the thing is, you might look at this and think like, well, she's got it figured out, everything's done. And like, look, we've all been there before. We'll likely be there again. Am I done learning now, as we've seen yesterday in Emmy and Jenny's talk, for example? No, we're never done learning. So I'm going to do that extremely cheesy thing where I bring the quote back from the beginning and like make it even cheesier. So I like to think that if Leonardo da Vinci were programming today, again, if it was him who said that, he'd probably say software is never finished, only abandoned. Pause for effect. So that's it, folks. Like, please take a look at these resources. I'm going to post these slides as well. You can check them out at carmanh.dev/dependency-management.pdf. And, well, thank you so much. Oh, right. Don't forget to tell them. Sorry, I don't know what my slides are trying to tell me. It's not really, like, the point of this presentation, but I think it would be fair to share that even though I used a knitting analogy, I'm more of a cross-stitcher. So maybe some of the metaphors didn't land, so thank you all for being so patient. I want to quickly shout out Matan for lending me the clicker. It's been super helpful, and thank you all for listening. Enjoy the rest of the conference.